Drakes was an ambassador from a distant galaxy, sent to Earth to meet with human leaders. His species was known across the stars for their intelligence and their ability to survive in harsh conditions. They didn't need sleep, didn't get tired, and never slowed down. Drakes had been briefed about humans before, but nothing could prepare him for what he was about to experience. When he first stepped onto Earth, he was impressed. The planet was rich with green plants and blue skies, something he had never seen in his own world. But despite all the beauty, there was a nagging feeling in his mind. His species had explored many worlds, meeting other alien races, but humans were different. They didn't seem as advanced, and yet there was something about them that made Drakes uneasy. He was taken to a meeting room with a few of Earth's most important leaders. These humans, dressed in simple clothes, looked at him with curiosity. They didn't seem afraid, and this puzzled Drakes. In his own world, ambassadors were treated with great respect, even fear. But here, humans were calm. Drakes couldn't help but notice how tired they looked. Their eyes seemed heavy, as if they hadn't slept in days. As the meeting started, Drakes began speaking about the purpose of his visit. He told them about his species' peaceful intentions and the possibilities of forming an alliance. But as he spoke, something strange happened. One of the human leaders, a woman in a blue suit, yawned loudly in the middle of his speech. Drakes blinked, confused. Did she not care about what he was saying? How could she be so careless in such an important meeting? Then, another human, a man with glasses, slouched in his chair, eyes half closed. Drakes felt his confusion grow. Why were they so tired? They were supposed to be the leaders of their world, yet here they were, acting like children who hadn't had enough rest. Drakes thought back to his own world. His people never slept. They were always alert, always ready. To him, sleep was a weakness. It was something his species didn't need. But here on Earth, it seemed like these humans couldn't function without it. He focused on the woman who had yawned. She was still sitting there, her head drooping, as if she might fall asleep at any moment. How could she be so careless? In Drakes' mind, this was a huge problem. If these humans couldn't stay awake during such an important meeting, what else could they fail to do? Would they fall asleep in the middle of battle? Could they even defend themselves? Drakes' mind raced as he tried to make sense of it all. He had learned that humans were fragile, their bodies weaker than those of his species. They needed food, water, and rest to survive. But rest? Why did they need so much of it? His species never slept, and they thrived. They didn't understand why other beings needed sleep. It seemed like a flaw to them. Still, Drakes knew he had to keep his mind open. His mission wasn't to judge humans, but to learn. So he stayed quiet and observed. The woman with the blue suit had now completely closed her eyes. The man with the glasses was doing the same. Drakes looked around the room, but he could see that most of the humans were in the same state. They were drifting off, one by one. For a moment, Drakes just stared. It was so strange. How could a species with such advanced technology and civilization be so helpless? Was this really what it meant to be human? Could they only function if they took breaks and slept? It didn't make sense. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The room had grown eerily quiet, with only the soft sound of breathing filling the space. The humans were all asleep now, their heads resting on their desks, some snoring lightly. Drakes couldn't help but stare. He had never seen anything like this before. How could they just stop functioning like that? How could they trust each other so much that they could sleep in a room full of strangers? It was then that Drakes realized something. These humans weren't weak. They were different. Their need for sleep was a mystery to him, but it was clear that it was a core part of who they were. They rested and recovered while he stayed awake, constantly alert. But the more he watched, the more he understood that their rest wasn't just about being lazy. It was part of what made them strong. They needed sleep to be better, faster, and more focused. It gave them an edge that Drakes hadn't expected. Drakes looked at the sleeping humans, feeling a mix of confusion and curiosity. He still didn't fully understand why sleep was so important to them, but he was starting to realize that maybe he had underestimated them. These humans might be more complex than he had thought. They had a power that Drakes couldn't even begin to grasp. As he sat there, alone in the room with these peaceful, sleeping beings, Drakes made a silent vow. He would learn more about humans. There was something powerful about them, something that went beyond what he could see at first glance, and as the humans slept, Drakes wondered what it was that made them so different, and perhaps so dangerous. Drakes couldn't stop thinking about what he had seen. The humans, in the middle of an important meeting, had just fallen asleep without any care in the world. He had never experienced anything like it. On his planet, no one ever slept. His people didn't need rest, and they always stayed alert, working tirelessly. To him, sleep was a weakness, something unnecessary. But these humans seemed to believe it was a normal part of life. It was hard for him to accept. After that first strange meeting, Drakes continued his mission, trying to understand more about Earth and its people. However, the more he observed, the more he realized that humans did the unthinkable. They slept everywhere, all the time. The next day, Drakes was taken to a busy human city. He was supposed to observe their daily life. The streets were crowded, filled with people moving about, but something strange caught his eye. He saw a group of humans sitting on a bench, talking and laughing, when suddenly, one by one, they just stopped. They sat there for a few seconds, then one of them, a young man, closed his eyes. Slowly, the others followed. Within moments, they were all asleep. Drakes blinked in disbelief. He had never seen anything like it. How could they just fall asleep in the middle of the day, in a busy city? People were walking around them, going about their business, but these humans were completely oblivious. They slept right there on the bench, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Drakes quickly turned away and continued walking. But as he moved through the city, he saw more and more humans doing the same thing. In the park, a group of workers sat down for lunch, only to fall asleep in the middle of their meal. At a street corner, a businesswoman in a suit leaned against a wall and fell asleep standing up, her briefcase still in hand. Everywhere he looked, humans seemed to sleep without warning, without care, in the most random places. The sight of it made Drakes uneasy. He couldn't understand why they did it. How could they function like this? Wasn't there a risk in falling asleep so easily? On his planet, sleeping wasn't something anyone would dare do. It was a sign of vulnerability. If you fell asleep, you would be caught off guard, unprotected. But these humans didn't seem to care. They were fearless when it came to sleep, and that, Drakes thought, was dangerous. Later that day, he was taken to a human hospital. It was one of the most advanced medical centers on the planet, and Drakes was curious to see how humans dealt with health. As he toured the facility, he watched doctors and nurses rushing from one patient to the next. But in one of the rooms, he saw something that confused him even more. A doctor, in the middle of a busy shift, lay down on a couch, closed his eyes, and fell asleep. A nurse beside him noticed and gently shook his shoulder, but the doctor didn't wake up. He kept sleeping, undisturbed by the noise of the hospital, by the patients, or by the work that needed to be done. Drakes couldn't believe it. A doctor, in a hospital, sleeping during a shift. How could this be? Why is he sleeping? Drakes asked one of the nurses who was walking by. The nurse looked at him, a little surprised. He's resting. It's important for him to get sleep so he can work better later. Everyone needs rest. But how can he sleep when there's so much to do? Drakes asked, his confusion growing. The nurse smiled. Humans need sleep to recharge. Without it, we can't function properly. It's our way of staying strong. Drakes didn't know how to respond. He had never heard anything like it. How could sleep be so important to humans? On his planet, everyone was always awake, always working. No one ever needed to rest. But these humans, they seemed to think that sleep was essential to being strong and doing their best work. It was a strange idea, but it made Drakes realize that sleep was not just something humans did out of laziness. It was a part of their survival. After his visit to the hospital, Drakes was taken to a nearby university, where he attended a lecture on human history. The professor, an elderly man with a thick beard, spoke about how humans had built their societies, developed their technology, and survived through challenges. As Drakes listened, something caught his attention. The professor mentioned how humans were able to achieve so much because they rested, because they slept and recovered. It wasn't just about staying awake. It was about finding balance. Drakes was beginning to understand something important. Humans didn't sleep because they were weak. They slept because it made them stronger. The more he watched, the more he realized that their need for sleep was not a flaw. It was part of what made them resilient. They could rest, heal, and come back stronger than before. As the day came to an end, Drakes couldn't stop thinking about what he had seen. Humans didn't just sleep, they embraced it. It was a part of their lives, and it made them who they were. But it was also terrifying. They didn't fear vulnerability like his species did. They had learned to trust in sleep, to rest and recharge, and that trust gave them a power Drakes couldn't yet understand. Drakes had seen the unthinkable. Humans slept everywhere, all the time, and it was a part of their strength. He would need to learn more about this strange power if he was ever going to understand what made humans truly dangerous. Drakes couldn't stop thinking about the humans. After seeing them sleep everywhere, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he was missing. On his home planet, sleep was unheard of. His people were always alert, always working, always doing. They didn't need rest, and they never grew tired. But humans, they seemed to need sleep to survive, and that made Drakes curious. He spent the next few days observing them closely, trying to understand more. He followed them in the streets, watching them work, eat, and interact. Everywhere he went, humans were resting. In the parks, on benches, in offices, even in the middle of the busiest parts of the city, humans seemed to sleep at the drop of a hat. One morning, Drakes visited a small cafe. He wanted to observe how humans interacted with each other when they weren't sleeping. He sat at a table near the window and watched as a group of humans sat down to drink coffee. They chatted for a while, laughing and talking. But then, to Drakes' surprise, one of them simply put his head down on the table and fell asleep. The others didn't seem bothered at all. In fact, they seemed to expect it. The man slept for a few minutes, then woke up, stretched, and resumed the conversation, as if nothing had happened. Drakes' mind raced. How could they function like this? How could they rest in the middle of everything? It was as though they were not afraid to be vulnerable, to let their guard down. He had never seen anything like it. He couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to understand more about this sleep. So, Drakes decided to ask the humans themselves. He began speaking with scientists, doctors, and even everyday people, trying to learn why sleep was so important to them. They all seemed to have the same answer. Sleep was essential for their well-being. It wasn't just something they did to relax. It was something their bodies needed in order to function. One day, Drakes met a human scientist named Dr. Harrison. He was an expert in human biology and had been studying sleep for years. Drakes had heard of him before and knew this was the person he needed to talk to. Dr. Harrison, Drakes said, trying to be as polite as possible. I don't understand. Why do humans sleep so much? Why can't you stay awake like my people? Dr. Harrison smiled, as if he had heard this question many times before. It's simple, really. Humans need sleep to stay healthy. Our bodies need time to recover. Without sleep, we wouldn't be able to think clearly or do anything at our best. But why? Drakes asked, confused. Why can't you just stay awake and keep working? You are losing so much time. Dr. Harrison thought for a moment before answering. Sleep is like recharging your batteries. When we sleep, our brains and bodies repair themselves. We grow stronger and we're able to think better, work harder, and live longer. It's not just about resting. It's about becoming the best version of ourselves. Drake's tried to wrap his mind around this. On his planet, they didn't need sleep. They didn't need to recharge or rest. They were always ready. But these humans, they seemed to need sleep for something much deeper than simple rest. It was as if sleep made them stronger, better in every way. Drake's couldn't ignore the fact that sleep was a mystery to him. Everything he knew about strength, power, and survival was different from what he was seeing here. He knew that humans were strong, but this new understanding made him wonder if there was something even greater about them. Could this sleep be their secret strength? The more Drake's learned, the more he began to understand the true importance of sleep to humans. It wasn't just about survival, it was about thriving. Humans didn't fear sleep. They welcomed it as a way to grow, to become stronger, to heal their bodies and minds. In some ways, it made them more powerful than Drake's had ever thought possible. As Drake's continued his research, he found more and more examples of humans using sleep to their advantage. Athletes, for example, rested for hours after intense training, allowing their muscles to heal and become stronger. Doctors and nurses, who worked long hours, used sleep to keep their minds sharp so they could make quick, life-saving decisions. Even children, who seemed to sleep more than adults, used that time to grow and learn. Drake's began to see sleep not as a weakness, but as a strength. Humans had mastered something that his people never understood. They had learned that in order to succeed, they had to take time to rest, recover, and recharge. This gave them an edge that Drake's didn't expect. But as much as he was beginning to understand, Drake still couldn't fully accept it. On his planet, sleep was a foreign concept, something that no one ever needed. Yet here, it was as if sleep was the key to everything: strength, health, and success. The more Drake's thought about it, the more he realized that the humans had something his species didn't. They had learned to rest and grow. And that, Drake's thought, was something truly terrifying. Drake's had spent days trying to understand humans and their strange need for sleep. Every day, he learned something new about them. But there was one thing that still confused him. He had seen humans sleep in strange places, but he had never seen them truly vulnerable. Until now. It happened one evening as Drake's was walking through a quiet street in a human city. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the buildings. The streets were less crowded than usual. People were heading home after a long day of work, and everything seemed calm. Drake's had grown used to observing humans by now. He was becoming more comfortable with their strange habits. But tonight, something felt different. As he walked past a small park, he noticed a human woman sitting on a bench. She was alone, resting her head back, her eyes closed. Drake's had seen this before. Humans often slept in public, and he had become used to it. But this time, he felt something strange in the air. The woman didn't move. Her breathing was slow and steady, but there was something about her stillness that made Drake's uneasy. It wasn't like the other times when humans fell asleep and woke up quickly. No, this was different. The woman was deep in sleep, and for a moment, Drake's wondered if something was wrong. His instincts told him to be cautious, but he couldn't understand why. As he watched, the woman's hand fell from the armrest of the bench, her fingers brushing the ground. A sudden noise broke the silence, footsteps behind him. Drake's turned quickly, his senses alert, and saw a group of strangers approaching. They were humans, too, but they didn't look like the kind of people Drake's was used to. They were dressed in ragged clothes, and their faces were hard, filled with anger. They were moving quickly, almost as if they were in a hurry to get somewhere. Drake's heart raced. Something was wrong. Without thinking, he quickly stepped closer to the woman, standing between her and the approaching strangers. His mind raced. He had heard about dangerous people, but he didn't know how far things could go here. He knew humans had their own problems with crime and violence, but he hadn't expected to see it firsthand. The strangers reached the bench, and the tallest one, a man with a scar running down his cheek, glanced at the woman on the bench. His eyes narrowed. The man reached out and nudged her arm roughly. She didn't wake up. Drakes felt his pulse quicken. He didn't know what to do. The woman was asleep, unaware of the danger, and these strangers seemed to be planning something. He could see the way they looked at her. Drakes could feel their intentions. They didn't seem to care that she was resting peacefully. As the man with the scar started to reach for the woman's bag, Drake's instincts took over. He couldn't just stand there and do nothing. Without thinking, he stepped forward, placing himself between the strangers and the woman. He stared down at them, his eyes cold. "What are you doing?" Drakes demanded, his voice low but firm. The man with the scar looked up at him in surprise. "What's it to you, alien?" He sneered, noticing Drake's unusual appearance. "This doesn't concern you." "I won't let you hurt her," Drake said, standing tall. The strangers laughed, but there was no humor in their laughter. It was dark and dangerous. "You're out of your league, alien. Go back to where you came from," one of them said, taking a step closer to Drake's. The man with the scar grabbed the woman's bag and yanked it toward him, but Drake's reacted quickly. He grabbed the man's arm, his grip strong. The man tried to pull away, but Drake's held on tight. His strength was nothing like the humans Drake's had seen before. There was no fear in his eyes, only calm determination. Drake's wasn't afraid. He didn't know why, but he felt like he had to protect this woman, even if she didn't know he was there. "Leave her alone," Drake's growled, his voice low. The strangers didn't back down. One of them pulled a knife from his pocket, holding it in front of him. Drake's didn't hesitate. With one swift move, he disarmed the man, knocking the knife out of his hand and sending it flying across the ground. The men stepped back, their faces full of shock. "This is your last warning," Drake said. "Leave now." The group hesitated, unsure of how to react. The woman on the bench remained asleep, unaware of the danger she had been in. Finally, the strangers grumbled and turned away, retreating into the shadows of the night. Drake's watched them disappear, making sure they wouldn't return. He stood there for a moment, catching his breath. His heart was still pounding in his chest, but he felt a sense of relief. The danger had passed, but something had changed inside him. For the first time, he realized how fragile humans could be. They were strong in ways he hadn't expected, but in some ways, they were vulnerable too. They needed protection, not just from their enemies, but from the dangers they couldn't see. Drake's glanced at the woman on the bench. She was still asleep, unaware of the close call. He let out a soft breath and stepped back. As he turned to leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had learned something important. Humans, with all their strength and resilience, were still fragile, and that made them more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The days after the strange encounter in the park were heavy on Drake's mind. He kept replaying the events in his head, the feeling of fear that had surged through him when the strangers approached, and the strange sense of responsibility he had felt to protect the woman, even though he barely knew her. For the first time, he realized that humans were far more vulnerable than he had thought. They weren't just strong in physical ways. They were fragile in ways he hadn't even considered, and that made him think. Drake's had learned so much about humans since arriving on their planet, but he still didn't understand everything. What was it that made them act the way they did? Why did they sleep so much? Why did they seem so trusting, even when they didn't know who might harm them? He needed answers. He needed to learn the truth. That's when he decided to speak to someone he hadn't spoken to before, a human philosopher named Eleanor. She was a well-known thinker who wrote books about human nature, survival, and the way people thought about the world. Drake's had read some of her work and found her ideas fascinating. He needed to hear what she thought about humans and their strange way of life. He found her sitting at a small table in a cafe one morning, sipping coffee and reading a book. Drake's had never been one to approach people easily, but something about Eleanor's calm and thoughtful presence made him feel that she could provide the answers he was seeking. "Eleanor?" he asked, his voice steady but unsure. She looked up from her book, her eyes kind and welcoming. "Yes, how can I help you?" she asked in a soft tone. "I've been trying to understand humans. I've been watching you, and I've seen many strange things. I need to know the truth about why you do the things you do, why you sleep, why you trust so easily. Why do humans behave this way?" Drakes asked, his curiosity taking over. Eleanor studied him for a moment, as though considering how best to answer. "I can see why you might be confused. To someone like you, who doesn't need sleep and doesn't understand the risks we face, it might seem strange. But let me explain." She leaned forward, her eyes focused on him. "You see, humans are not invincible. We have our weaknesses, our flaws, and our fears. Sleep isn't just something we do for rest. It's part of who we are. Our bodies need it to stay healthy. But sleep isn't just physical. It's emotional too. It's when we let our guards down. It's when we allow ourselves to heal, to feel safe, and to be vulnerable." Drakes listened carefully. This was something he hadn't expected. He had seen humans sleep in the streets, in busy places, without a care in the world. But Eleanor was saying that sleep wasn't just about resting, it was about trust. Trust in the world around them, trust in the people they loved, and even trust in themselves. "We humans sleep because we trust the world to be kind to us," Eleanor continued. "We trust that we will wake up safe, that no harm will come to us while we rest. It's a way of showing faith in the world. When we sleep, we are at our most vulnerable, and in that vulnerability, we find strength." Drakes was stunned. He had never thought of it that way. The idea of trusting the world enough to sleep, to allow oneself to be vulnerable, was something completely foreign to him. His species didn't sleep, didn't need to rest. They were always alert, always ready. But the humans, they rested, knowing that they would wake up and face the world again, no matter what it brought. "But what happens when that trust is broken?" Drakes asked, his voice quiet. Eleanor's expression softened. "It's painful. Trust is a precious thing. When someone breaks that trust, it can feel like a part of us is broken too. But we don't stop trusting. We learn from it, and we move forward. Trust is a part of who we are. We can't live without it." Drakes' mind was racing. He had always thought that strength came from being alert, from being ready for anything. But now he was beginning to see that there was a different kind of strength in humans. A strength that came from letting go, from trusting the world, and from being vulnerable. You let yourself be vulnerable, and that's what makes you strong?" Drakes asked, still trying to understand. Eleanor nodded. "Exactly. It's easy to hide behind walls, to never show weakness. But humans don't do that. We embrace our weaknesses because they make us stronger. When we trust, when we rest, we grow. We become better." Drakes' mind was reeling. The humans didn't just survive. They thrived. They had found a way to balance strength and vulnerability, something Drakes' species could never understand. He realized now that it wasn't just about physical power or alertness. The human ability to trust, to sleep, to let go, that was what made them unique. As Drakes left the cafe, he couldn't stop thinking about Eleanor's words. He had spent so much time trying to understand humans from the outside, looking at their actions without considering the deeper reasons behind them. But now he saw them in a different light. The humans were not weak for needing sleep. They were strong in ways Drakes had never imagined. And as he walked through the busy streets, watching the humans go about their lives, he realized that maybe, just maybe, the thing that made them so powerful was their ability to trust and rest, even in a world full of dangers. In that moment, Drakes understood the truth, and it was far more complicated and beautiful than he had ever thought. Drakes had learned so much about humans in the past few days. They were not just fragile, weak creatures. They were resilient, adaptable, and full of surprises. Their ability to trust the world around them, their capacity for kindness, and their willingness to sleep despite the dangers. These were all things Drakes had never expected to encounter. But as he walked through the streets, his mind still reeling from the conversation with Eleanor, a terrifying thought began to creep into his mind. What if he had misunderstood everything? What if there was something darker hidden beneath the surface? He had seen humans sleep in public places, trusting that nothing would harm them. But what if that trust was misplaced? What if the world they lived in wasn't as safe as they believed? What if the very thing they relied on, sleep, was the one thing that made them most vulnerable? Drakes couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. His instincts told him that humans were walking around, unaware of the dangers around them. They trusted the world too much. They slept in peace, even though there were threats everywhere. He had seen the way people sometimes took advantage of others, the way danger lurked in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. As he continued walking, his thoughts grew darker. He realized that what he had seen in the park wasn't just an isolated event. It was a sign. The woman he had protected wasn't the only one who could be harmed. Humans all over the world were at risk every time they closed their eyes to sleep. Drakes had spent so much time marveling at the strength of humans, but now he was beginning to see them in a different light. Their strength wasn't in their ability to fight or defend themselves. It was in their ability to trust and hope. But that hope, that trust, was fragile. And if it were ever broken, what would become of them? A cold chill ran through Drakes as he remembered the group of strangers from the park. They had been ruthless, willing to harm the woman just for a few possessions. What if there were more people like them? What if the entire world was full of people who saw the vulnerable, the trusting, as easy targets? What if humans had no idea how dangerous the world truly was? The thought gripped Drakes' heart like a vice. He had to know more. He needed to understand if humans were truly as safe as they appeared, or if their ability to trust was the very thing that could destroy them. He found himself standing in front of a small, dark alleyway, where he had seen people gather before. The area wasn't busy, but he knew it was a place where things could happen in the shadows. Drakes took a deep breath and stepped into the alley, his senses alert. As he moved deeper into the darkness, he heard voices. Low, hushed conversations, but there was something off about the way the people spoke. Drakes crept closer, trying to hear more clearly. What do you think? They're too trusting. They don't even know what's coming, one voice whispered, its tone low and menacing. They sleep too easily. We'll take advantage of that. Another voice responded, a laugh following the words. Drakes froze. His heart pounded in his chest as he realized what he was hearing. They were talking about humans, talking about how easy it would be to take advantage of their trust, of their vulnerability while they slept. A wave of fear washed over Drakes. His worst fear had come true. Humans were living in a world that was far more dangerous than they realized. Their ability to trust, to sleep, to be vulnerable. These were not strengths. They were weaknesses that could be exploited. He stepped back, retreating into the shadows, trying to process what he had just learned. The world wasn't safe for humans. They couldn't just go around trusting everyone, sleeping wherever they pleased, believing that nothing bad would happen to them. They had no idea how many dangers were lurking just out of sight. Drakes' mind raced as he thought about what to do. Should he warn them? Could he warn them? Would they believe him if he told them the truth, that their trust in the world was misplaced? Or would they dismiss him, as if he were just another paranoid alien? As he stood there, deep in thought, he realized something even more terrifying. What if humans had known all along? What if they had accepted the dangers of the world and chose to trust anyway? What if their strength wasn't in avoiding danger, but in facing it head-on, knowing that there was no way to escape it? Drakes shook his head, trying to make sense of everything. He had spent so much time trying to understand humans, and now he was more confused than ever. Were they truly as weak as he had first thought? Or was there something much deeper, something about their willingness to trust and love despite the dangers, that made them far stronger than any species he had ever encountered. He didn't know the answer yet, but one thing was clear: humans weren't just surviving. They were living in a world full of dangers, and yet they kept trusting, they kept hoping, and they kept sleeping. And somehow, that made them even more terrifying than the threats they faced. Drakes walked out of the alley, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. One thing was certain: he had a lot more to learn. But for now, he couldn't help but wonder, what would happen when the trust of the humans was shattered? Would they rise up or fall apart? The terrifying realization hit him hard. He wasn't just learning about the humans. He was beginning to understand their most dangerous trait, and it was something he couldn't ignore. Drake stood at the edge of the bustling city, the sound of life around him barely registering in his mind. His thoughts were consumed by the terrifying realization that had shaken him to his core. He had come to this planet to understand humans, to learn what made them tick, to know if they were a species worth studying, perhaps even worth fearing. But what he had discovered was more complicated than he could have imagined. Humans were not just simple creatures, fragile and weak as they seemed. They were far more complex. They were a species of contradictions. On one hand, they were vulnerable, trusting the world around them in ways that seemed almost foolish. On the other hand, they were capable of strength that came from a place he had never seen before. He could still hear the words from the alley in his mind. "They sleep too easily. We'll take advantage of that." Those words made Drake's sick to his stomach. The very thing that made humans so powerful, their trust, their willingness to sleep and let their guards down, was also the thing that made them dangerous targets. Drakes had spent so much time focusing on their vulnerability, believing that their need for rest and their trust in the world made them weak. But now he understood. It wasn't their sleep that was their weakness. It was their willingness to trust in a world that didn't always care about them. It was their belief that goodness and kindness were enough to protect them. But Drakes realized something even more important. Humans, despite their vulnerabilities, were not helpless. They had learned to live in a world full of dangers, knowing full well that harm could come at any moment. They didn't hide from the world's darkness. They confronted it. And they did so with a kind of quiet strength that Drakes had never seen before. As he walked through the streets, he couldn't stop thinking about Eleanor's words. Humans did not fear vulnerability. They embraced it. They didn't hide from the dangers around them. They trusted. They hoped. They had learned to live with their weaknesses and faced the world with courage. It was a strength that came from within, something Drakes had failed to recognize before. But it was also a terrifying thought. What if that trust was destroyed? What would happen to humans if their faith in the world, in each other, was shattered? Would they fall apart, or would they rise even stronger? Drakes' thoughts were interrupted by the sight of a group of humans walking by, laughing, joking, and clearly enjoying their day. They didn't seem to care about the dangers that might be lurking in the shadows. They didn't seem to notice the world's cruelty. They were too busy living, too busy trusting. It struck Drakes then. Humans were not just surviving in a dangerous world. They were thriving in it. Every day they woke up, faced the unknown, and kept going. It was a dangerous existence, yes, but it was also one filled with resilience. And that was something that made humans powerful in a way that Drakes couldn't ignore. But still, the question lingered in his mind. What would happen if that trust was ever broken? If someone took advantage of their vulnerability, would they collapse, or would they fight back? Drakes didn't have the answer. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that humans had something in them that was beyond strength, beyond power. They had the ability to keep going, no matter what happened. It was their hope, their belief that things could get better, that kept them moving forward. As he stood there, watching the people around him go about their daily lives, he finally understood the true nature of humans. They were not invincible. They were not perfect. But they had something that made them stronger than any species he had ever encountered. They had hope. They had the ability to trust, to love, and to believe in a better future, even when the world around them was dark and uncertain. And it was this quality that terrified Drakes the most, because in all his years, he had never met a species so willing to face the world's dangers head-on, with nothing but their hearts and their hope to protect them. Drakes' final thoughts were clear. Humans were not weak. They were not to be underestimated. They were stronger than he had realized, stronger than any species he had ever known. And that made them dangerous. But it also made them worthy of respect. As he looked out over the city one last time, Drakes realized that he had been wrong about humans. They were not just a species to study. They were a species to admire. And maybe, just maybe, there was more to learn from them than he had ever imagined.